Hey.
Good.
Did you run into the stuff that Dylan ran into, Kayla?
No, but I did hit some just older traffic that was, like I should have been expecting, but I wasn't expecting.
Denver, but there was an accident. Denver.
From Denver, do you come up I-70 to get your thing, or do you go up one of the candidates?
It's kind of both ways, but it looks like mostly you go up I-25 and then go over through Broomfield, Boulder, so you come that way. I guess it kind of depends on where you are, but that's just what I'm seeing.
Takes me 1 way.
Yeah,
Really?
Yeah, I go 70 to 1072.
Yeah.
Just do what Siri says.
mm-hmm. I still know where. I've never been here. I'm just gonna. Teams message and
Here. Where are people?
They're filtering. Yeah, go for it.
Hang out in the back. I have to leave by 6:30 to pick someone up and head to the high school.
All good. What's at the high school this evening?
It's choir class.
Nice. I assume more likely we'll get started in about 5 to 10 minutes. The fall's done, Leadville, and like Summit County, no more. Yeah, like 14 days.
Yeah.
Charlie was saying like it hasn't even started yet down in the front.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
There's like.
Oh my God, that's ready to share.
Mm-hmm.
The around through. Coffee.
I just.
Oh, nice.
No.
I believe I'm a night. I went to Vermont for the week, so it was great there, but it's like, there was people here, probably like a week from there, so.
Yeah, is it like now, do you think, early on?
Yeah, more or less. The mountains for sure. Burlington hangs on until the end of October, just with the lake there, but yeah, it's wild.
So. I'm going here. You can see the time. It's.
She's just getting back from a bike trip. And
I know to the side. And then you guys know when you were gonna go to the on the side of mine. We did. It's on church, there's a normally myself, there's a one on the side of the south. Yeah.
It's still yeah.
Johnson's downstairs. Johnson's downstairs.
He was thinking about the wall.
Oh,
I just.
He may or may not.
that's okay. He's
Studying.
option speed.
Pictures for.
Oh,
Nice.
nice.
It was difficult.
Yeah, no, and I think this could usually. So. But he does. That's very busy. Gonna do the stairs. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, right. I actually like talking to these things. It's just involved in it.
No. Yes.
All right.
8. Only 4 minutes. Yes, yes, no, I do too. Yes. I know, we need to like email Google. Who's at the helm?
Yes, that took me that way the first time.
One time that actually looked at.
Yeah, I know, I thought about just like parking there and walking. On this door. Oh. I know. Okay, so I am gonna do everything up until the resiliency framework side, and then it's got the plan chapters.
Yep.
So that's kind of how they shake out.
Yep, sounds good. And you're doing
Just
I studied a little bit today.
the multimodal transportation plan. Mostly wrapping up around the same time. To say it's like in progress. I know. Feel free to move the chairs.
Yeah, they were set up before we set everything else up. So it may not be accurate for actually watching. Thank you.
Was it a different color before?
I hadn't dyed it in a while, so it just kind of,
Oh, uh-huh.
it's October.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Okay, just a couple more minutes here, and then we'll get started. Welcome.
Oh.
True, yeah.
It was a lot of people. It was a direction.
Oh, you did.
Was that the last day?
Yeah.
Yeah, those were kind of like ethics conversation.
Right.
Peace out.
Good to grab it.
Just wondering how that happened.
Oh.
This right there.
Well, we got.
That's how they've been trying to get people.
Yeah, I'm ready.
So I wasn't.
There's such even for me.
Yeah.
For everyone.
It seems like it's nice.
Christmas. I can't like share. I don't see all that.
30 hours. That was webinars.
Oh, man.
Self-recording. I was honest.
Yeah, I mean, it's all, it's just like a picture. Like we're just fitting into this.
Right.
You don't have to think about it.
So like. I don't think. Oh, very reassuring.
Were you in school?
I think I did.
Great PA. Well, there's like requirements. It's like you can't just, like, sure, you're.
Oh, no, like, not the ICP, just.
Oh, well, that's the credit card thing. We got you.
Yeah. I know, but that's like.
Do you have to have your business card with your contact? Maybe. Sure, I just gave one away.
I think mine are all in the cars.
Yeah, this is not my business card, but I'll write my thing on it.
They're relevant.
They're just like some.
Yeah, I'll send you that.
Yeah. It'd be like the iPhone thing that's like. Yeah.
Oh, I, Uber driver today.
Oh, really? My business card. Or just.
Okay, we will get started in 30 seconds when John's finished.
Sorry.
No, you're totally.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's how it's gotta be.
Okie dokie. So thank you all for being here this afternoon and evening. I'm Aiden Nykoff with SE Group, here with my team to present the draft comprehensive plan. I'm here today with Caleb Schmidt, Still McBride, and Cheney Bostic of Studio Seed. She will be presenting the Subarea plan. So the way this will go is that we'll have a couple slides on the comprehensive plan, pause for questions, do the downtown Subarea plan presentation, and pause for questions at the end. So jumping on in, the background. So how we got to this point, some of you may have been involved in early public engagement opportunities for this plan. We had our open house way back in January, which felt way long ago. And then accompanied that, we had an online survey open for about a month for people to give just overall general visioning feedback. And then Cheney hosted both an online and an in-person downtown sub-area workshop. Sort of dotted in this timeline, we had several stakeholder meetings that were more topic area specific. So meeting with Housing, Health, and Human Services Group, Youth Advisory Board, ProSab, Sustainability Advisory Board, DDA, utilities, arts and culture, and downtown business and property owners. I believe there was one more like kind of natural resources in there as well. But that all got us to today. So we'll have the draft plan presentation. There will be more opportunities for feedback in the next week and a half. We are still fully in drafting mode, looking at a potential December adoption. So still time to shift course if needed. We will be presenting to the Planning Commission pretty soon here, later in October, and then the Board of Trustees in November, again, getting to that December plan adoption date. So with any comprehensive plan, we like to look at the background, the demographic trends of what the community has gone through. I will say that a lot of this is census information, 2020, so not, kind of static. And now that it's almost 2025, this might not feel the most relevant, but it's the best information that we have at this point. So median home price, this is something that you'll hear talked a lot about, housing affordability, increased costs. sorry, I'm in the projector. But looking from 2010 to 2022, almost a 15% increase in median home price. Median age has gotten slightly older in that time frame, 2010 to 2020, and then a pretty modest population growth. But anecdotally, we hear that definitely between the 2020 and 2024, there has been more population growth in that time.
Was this specifically for the town of Ned?
Yes.
So did you guys ever consider it external, like out toward and over to Rollinsville as far as population growth? Like the areas that service the town of Ned?
Yeah, so we didn't necessarily do like a custom blob to get that information, but the plan does speak to some of the importance of that region on the town and
Yeah.
vice versa. So it is considered, but we didn't look necessarily at population growth in that geographic area.
Okay.
To your point here, Ned has sort of a distinct role in a lot of these different geographic areas. So it's both a part of what we're calling the peak to peak region, or not we, but it's just called that, which does have influence on both the employment centers, the housing centers, and some of the service areas. Similar to with Boulder, we see service area distinctions, housing pressures from people commuting in and out of Boulder. The Denver, the RTD boundary, and then this larger one is the Regional Council of Governments boundary. So that really determines both capacity support, planning support, grants, funding, services. So it is influenced by quite a few regional entities. Shifting a little bit to the plan structure, the new plan is organized into these 8 core topic chapters. If you're familiar with the previous plan, it had more of a thematic approach where there wasn't necessarily a specific transportation chapter or recreation chapter. And that might have worked for the time, but we're hearing a need for a little bit more traditional plan chapters. So the Parks and Rec director can look into one chapter to find the information that's relevant to their program. So each chapter is organized with a set of existing conditions and key issues to start, a little bit of what we heard from the community, and then a vision statement. These were partially developed by the Envision 2030 process that was started pre-COVID and kind of paused during the COVID times. And then were sort of reaffirmed and evaluated during this process. So we definitely built on that great work. The recommendations are sorted by objectives, strategies, and then actions. And that's the bulk of this presentation. We'll be going chapter by chapter, understanding the objectives and actions in each chapter. So what else has changed from 2013? The 2013 plan had a big focus on sustainability, and we are kind of shifting that more into a resilience framework, both to encompass the important considerations around sustainability, but also thinking about Nederland as well connected as it might seem to some of their Front Range communities can be cut off fairly easily. And so what can we do in the town, in the plan, to make sure that we're prepared for hazards, that we're looking at ways to power our community, fund our community, grow our community in a resilient way. Sort of what I mentioned earlier, shifting towards those traditional plan chapters sorted by topic area, just to be clear and not have to, look deep into the chapters to find your specific information. And then finally, a lot of the feedback we heard when we were starting this process is that the 2013 plan had a couple areas where the language was a little bit soft and potentially contradictory. So we made very clear efforts in this plan to be very clear on those strategies and priorities. So kind of speaking to some of those resilience themes and other things that have shifted in the last 10 to 12 years, we now have, I guess all of these are both things that have been trends in NED, but also greater planning trends in the county, in the region. So I forget exactly when the law was passed or the policy was passed, But now comprehensive plans have to have considerations about water use and land use. There's also more emphasis on wildfire mitigation from a federal level and from the local level, knowing just how sensitive this area is to wildfires. I'll skip over resilience since we just kind of talked about that, and these all filter in. But generally, the trend is shifting away from some of the just traditional, we want to reduce emissions, into more of a hazard mitigation resilience framework. Next, housing. So Nederland is not the only community in Colorado in the country that is facing housing shortages, which are growing home costs. Finally, equity and climate change. So equity, really, I think we heard this as a value in the open house, really wanting to make sure that all of our strategies are considering equity and inclusion throughout. And then finally, climate change, just knowing, I think that's kind of where the resilience part comes in, increased uncertainty, potentially, periods of drought that could then lead to higher wildfire susceptibility. Okay, I'm going to switch over here. My colleague Caleb is going to present the resilience framework, and then we'll launch into the plan chapters.
Great. Yeah, so we just want to take a chance, to talk a little bit more about resiliency as a new framework. So like Aiden mentioned, the last plan had this overarching framework of sustainability, and then each chapter, all the policies, all the strategies sort of were funneled through that idea of sustainability. So now looking at resilience, what is resilience? Basically, resilience speaks to a community's ability to function even when there are shocks or unexpected things that happen. So it could be natural hazard related, it could be climate change. When we're talking about resilience, it encompasses sustainability. So sustainability is not lost, that's still a core value to resilience, but it's also talking about hazard mitigation, emergency response, community cohesion, and just sound governance in general. So when we wanted to implement this as a framework that would be useful, we found the City Resilience Index, which is a way of specifically talking about resilience in the context of development and urban settings. And so that's broken down into 4 sort of main pillars, one being health and well-being, a second being economy and society, infrastructure and ecosystems, and leadership and strategy. So we did some thinking in the comprehensive plan about what those specifically mean, a little bit more contextualized to Nederland. And then you'll see this framework throughout our presentation as we go through each strategy. These symbols will kind of be there to show, okay, this strategy relates back to the idea of health and well-being in this way. And so that's just kind of show that through line of resilience and how each policy kind of goes back to this framework. Great, so that sort of concludes our overarching, how the plan is structured. And now we're going to be going through each topic chapter. We'll talk about key takeaways in each chapter, as well as what those objectives are. And that's what we're most interested in getting feedback on. So the first chapter that we're talking about is land use. So this is at the top of our comprehensive plan, and it literally speaks to what the land uses will be in Nederland, how we're using that rare resource of land. So when we're talking about land use, it's really helpful to look at your zoning. So that's here in this top graph. This is visualized as a percentage of area. And so zoning is what is legally expected on a particular parcel or applied to a parcel. So you can see here that you have mountain residential zoning is that green, that's kind of your largest zone district. However, you can compare this to your land use. And so that's your area, how things are actually being used, whether or not it's a legal use isn't necessarily relevant. What is actually built on the parcel? And so you can kind of see some mismatches or some interesting things start to emerge here. So a few takeaways that I think are really helpful to just kind of set the context here is that 7% of Nederland's land area is comprised of vacant parcels. So that speaks to a lot of space still for growth to happen in this community. 50.7% of land area in Nederland is used for low density residential, so just single family detached homes. On the flip side of that, only 0.5% of land area is actually used for medium and high density housing. So we're seeing, a big bias towards that lower density housing. And then sort of speaking to this a bit more, there's a mismatch between, there are 2 zones in town called medium density residential and high density residential. Those make up about 8% of land area, but again, we're only seeing 0.5% of actual medium and high density housing. So there's not as much as those names of zone districts might suggest there. So talking about some key issues that we heard from the community regarding land use, the need for housing is obviously very front and center here, as well as the need for affordable housing. So these are two different ideas. One, that just having more housing in general is a good idea, but also specifically having affordable housing to make sure that there's that economic diversity is important. We also noticed that there are some regulations that are currently in the code that are making it harder to build housing. So, for example, minimum lot size requirements is a good example of one. This house on the right was built in 1967, but it wouldn't be legally built today because of the minimum lot size requirements. It's on too small of a lot to be built. But this is a good example of some regulations that might be too restrictive, because I think most people would look at this house and agree that it's not necessarily, too high density. But that's just kind of speaking to how some of the zoning regulations are restricting housing development today. And then another issue that's kind of come up is this idea of industrial zoning. There's only one industrially zoned part of town, which is the Wolf Tongue area. However, there's still a lot of housing in that area, which is totally fine, but there's been conversations about what do we want the future of that land use specifically to be. And so that's been a conversation that you will see in the comp plan as well. All right, so speaking to some of the objectives of the land use chapter, the first objective is to direct new growth to appropriate locations and encourage sustainable infill development. So this is all about just making sure that the development that does happen is happening in the right places at the right size, not disrupting the character of town, those sorts of considerations. So to adjust or to implement this, we're looking at things like adjusting minimum lot size requirements, making sure that developments are fitting the scale and character of town. Objective 2 is to promote the development of more affordable housing with supportive land use regulation. My colleagues are about to talk a lot about housing, so I'm not going to go over this one too much, but those actions are going to be in both chapters. Objective 3 talks about preserving the historic mountain town character of downtown Nederland. So this is making sure that we're implementing architectural design standards. Cheney's going to talk about this a little bit in her downtown sub-area plan, as well as having view preservation, historic preservation, those themes front and center. Objective 4 is to support key businesses with appropriate land use. And so this is making sure that the land use policies on the books are aligning with the economic goals of town. So for example, this could mean promoting in-home childcare, making sure that we have high quality commercial space that would be flexible, that would be ready to take on, say, if a doctor, wants to have commercial space that's high enough quality for those kinds of uses. So just making sure that there's that alignment there. Objective 5 is clarifying and simplifying code and land use designations. The idea that land use shouldn't necessarily be overly complicated. Developers should know what they're, essentially expected to do. So here we're looking at things like streamlining permitting, revising PUD requirements, which is planned unit development. A lot of developments in Nederland go through that right now, and it's very onerous. And just making sure that we have clear and concise development requirements. And then this final objective is mitigating hazards with land use regulation. So this speaks to things that Nederland is already doing but should continue to do, such as prohibiting floodplain development, increasing the importance of defensible, home hardening, defensible space, those sorts of things, either through education or through looking into potential regulation and wildfire mitigation education. So that covers the objectives for land use. Our next, we'll talk a little bit more. Land use is sort of the big chapter. So one of the last things we wanted to highlight is the future land use map. So a lot of thinking went into this, talking about, okay, what is an ideal allocation of land uses for the town of Nederland? Really, this future land use map isn't too far off from what Nederland looks like today, but two things that are worth mentioning is sort of a theme of making sure that the downtown core is really having those downtown uses, as well as mixed use residential neighborhoods. These are neighborhoods that are still primarily residential, but could have things such as, post offices, churches, and small businesses supporting that daily mix of residential activities. The town perimeter, these would be those parcels seen in yellow and lighter green, which makes up most of town, by land area at least, would be mainly residential neighborhoods. So in yellow, that would be the neighborhood residential zones. We're looking at mainly single family homes, but a mix of multi-unit homes in there as well. Churches and schools and those sorts of uses that go along with residential. And then in the mountain residential zone, these are these lighter green areas, that's where you're really only expecting to see single family home development, primarily because of the more difficult mountainous terrain of developing there. Now we will go on to talk about housing.
Hi, everybody. So I'm here to talk about housing, which is everybody's favorite topic these days, I think. So as you all are probably very well aware, housing affordability is a pretty drastic issue here. So, and it's, as we highlighted in our sort of early demographic slides, it's getting really, really worse in a really short period of time too. And that's, pretty unique to Nederland in some capacities. It's also happening all around Colorado, but I think the mountain towns are really feeling that pinch a lot more, especially since COVID. Seeing a massive influx nationally of more people moving to mountain towns, get closer to recreation, have new small town amenities, things of that nature. And so I think this really kind of starkly highlights it that today, this is from the recent housing needs assessment that was completed for the town in 2023. A household would need to make over 200,000 to purchase a median home comfortably in the town of Nederland. So if you don't already have a house, I hope that you're able to afford a house. Housing diversity, so something that kind of exacerbates this is that for the most part, 94% of your current housing stock is single family detached housing. So it is a little limiting in the sense that like most of your housing stock is really only serving for the most part one family or household that can live in that house at any given time. And so the other thing that's interesting about your housing market here is that, and this is somewhat, the case in a lot of other mountain communities, but I think it's pretty stark here, is that your housing prices are really not grounded in the context of your local employment. So only about 1% of your community both lives and works in the town of Nederland. And so most of the people that are, staffing your community businesses are coming from elsewhere. To your point earlier, the peak to peak region is, kind of helping supply a lot of the town staff, the community staff, the people that are working in local businesses, things of that nature. And over a third of your current residents are, going elsewhere for their source of work. So they might be dependent on Boulder, Denver, some other larger communities, or they might be teleworking and they just happen to live. So to try and get at this, the town has been very proactive, and I think that they can be very well commended in the sense that they're going through a housing needs assessment. They went through a housing needs assessment in 2023. It's been a really great plan. It's been a really good thing for us to lean on as a guiding resource. So continuing to implement the recommendations, the town's already, hard at work at trying to tackle some of the recommendations from that plan. But some ones that are kind of left over is continuing to define affordability, looking at density bonuses. So that would be like, allowing a developer to build an extra unit in place of maybe going in for some sort of exaction or, giving the town maybe like a new public sidewalk or some sort of new public benefit. Expedited development review. We hear this in communities all across Colorado that for a lot of developers, going through the development review process can be cumbersome. It can slow down their project, and it makes it hard because that's all time. That's also money on there, and that makes it hard for them to get the development in place. And then decreasing development review fees. So development review fees are not necessarily like the biggest cost when it comes to a new development, but kind of, for the most part, developers will talk about their capital stack. So it's usually all these different sources of funding that go into putting in a new house or a new mixed use development. And, everything that you can kind of take away out of that stack is just one less source of funding that they need in order to try and get units to pencil out in the back end. So development review fees are one little tool that you can leverage in that capacity. The state of Colorado had a very busy legislative year last year. And so there's a lot of housing related legislation. Some of you may be familiar with it, but unless you're a housing nerd, I also don't expect you to be following along with every single bill that comes out of the legislature either. House Bill 1271, this was actually from 3 years ago now, but they supply grants. And so continuing to leverage those, the town has used 1271 grants before, continuing to leverage them will be key. Finding funding for a housing coordinator position, that housing is a big job, from the town side, being able to help with expediting development reviews, finding funding to help offset the cost of affordable units, things of that nature. That's a big task, and right now it's spread across a lot of different people. So being able to find one person that can kind of wear that hat and own that position. There's a lot of opportunities for technical assistance coming out of these recent bills. So the Department of Local Affairs, or DOLA, is a lot of money behind putting things together like housing needs assessments or putting things together like housing technical assistance. So understanding the local financing and things of that nature. And then there's going to be some qualification requirements for funding. We're still kind of digesting what the legislative policies trying to tell us, but for the most part, there's requirements that the town will be subject to. And in some of those cases, you can kind of opt into them in some senses of like joining 1313. No, it's not 13. It's 1271 and agreeing to basically build a certain amount of affordable housing units. Prop 123, thank you. And then the last one is continuing to build on partnerships with Boulder County. Boulder County is the Boulder County Housing Authority. I know there's also conversations going on about building a peak-to-peak or putting in place a peak-to-peak housing authority and continuing to align with Boulder in this capacity.
Really quick, one question on the previous slide, just as a note, we did get a grant in LPC to do a housing coordinator and we're gonna do with Lions and that person's probably gonna be on by the end of the year, so.
Awesome. Well, we can take that one.
Yeah.
One action already done. So creating and preserving affordable housing. So this is also looking at, so as my colleague mentioned earlier, kind of affordable housing is in some ways kind of different from just the regular housing that you think of in the market, right? So typically what happens is, the market kind of has a demand for housing units, developers respond, come in, build new housing, and that housing is kind of, the price of that housing is reflective on what's the median home value in this community. Affordable housing is not necessarily something that the market's going to create on its own. Affordable housing is usually something that's subsidized through federal, state, or local dollars to help kind of offset the cost of that housing unit so that somebody who is living there pays a subsidized fee and is not necessarily paying for the exact market value of the house. So that might be a little confusing, but basically what we're trying to say here is that, in order to provide affordable housing, there are some things that need to happen. And then also finding opportunities to preserve housing that's already maybe existing in the community that could become unaffordable for certain folks and making sure that they still can afford to live here. So things like inclusionary zoning, providing support and subsidies for existing housing and making sure that people can stay in place. And then helping households access and afford homes. So this is kind of more on the demand side. Everything we've been talking about now is making sure that we have units or can build units quicker or be able to subsidize units at an affordable rate. This side is looking at more of like being able to help people who are looking to buy housing be able to afford it. So housing and rental assistance, looking at employer assisted housing. So leveraging some partnerships with major employers in the area, housing choice vouchers, and then just cause eviction programs. So making sure that people that want to stay in your community don't feel like they're going to get displaced. So let's turn it back over to Caleb.
Sweet.
All right, yeah, on to the next chapter, and that is recreation. So yes, talking about recreation, what are some of the key issues? Yeah, let's. Yeah.
I think we're trying to wait until after, and yeah, there's a couple more chapters, but just mostly that I don't want,
Right,
there's a what?
you're like 8.
Yeah, there's
That sounds
8 chapters. So I guess our idea was to get through the chapters for the comp plan, have questions all about the comp plan, so then we can pivot to the downtown sub-area plan, which does require people to keep their questions in mind for a little bit, which hopefully, yeah. So yeah, we'll do that then. Thank you. I think the next chapters we'll move through a little bit more quickly. The recreation chapter, some of the key issues that we talked about, we're kind of looking at indoor and outdoor recreation. Looking at indoor recreation, what we heard loud and clear was this need for an indoor pool facility. So that's really risen to the top. Looking at outdoor recreation, kind of the inverse of that, we've been seeing a conversation about in-town trail connectivity, acknowledging that there's already a lot of in-town trails and but that they could be connected to key destinations in the community a little bit better and potentially to trail networks outside the community. So these are the desires that we're hearing from people in town. All things being equal, people on the survey said that they would prefer to see maintenance of existing facilities as opposed to building new facilities. Of course, there could be instances where new facility makes sense, but in general, maintenance is that priority. We heard a lot about the Gateway Park area, that idea of making that side of Barker Reservoir closest to town a little bit more of an activated space, having that activated water, having more potentially water activities. I know the city of Boulder is sort of involved in that. and also just having that be a stronger connection to town with an amphitheater. And then finally, the community center, which we are in now, and we can hear the recreation going on, is a keystone of those traditional recreation offerings like basketball programs, youth programs, things like that. So it's very important, but we also are recognizing the needs for renovations and reimagining community centers. So that's highlighted heavily in this chapter as well. So what are those objectives for this chapter? Again, speaking to maintenance, that first objective is going to be prioritizing the maintenance and operations of already successful pre-existing recreation facilities. So things that are already working, whether it's a facility or a program, we want to make sure that they keep working. So we're looking at things like maintaining Chippewa Park, having community center programming that's already being used a lot, continuing those programs, and then utilizing community volunteering to maintain trails, maintain facilities, those sorts of things. Objective 2, this is going to be talking a lot about supporting and expanding indoor recreation opportunities. So talking here a little bit about a renovation plan for the community center, starting to look at making sure that there's going to be that programmable space for those recreation activities to continue in the community center, and also starting to study the feasibility of an indoor pool, as that is a very high concern for the community, is something that we talk about in this objective. Objective 3, we're talking about improving in-town trail networks and pocket parks. So here, the idea is connecting trails a little bit more to key destinations within the town, making sure that the network is consistent, that there aren't dead ends, improving trail accessibility, and developing plazas and pocket parks. All of this can be we can start to get at this through the development of a trail network expansion plan. And then the fourth objective would be expanding outdoor recreation offerings near Barker Meadow Reservoir. So we can look at the amphitheater feasibility, connecting Barker Reservoir more to downtown, and collaborating with the city of Boulder to kind of start to get those things in motion. Transportation, going back to Dylan.
Okay, so transportation, interesting. So there's a lot of kind of disparate things going on here, but the number one thing that we heard was that there's a lack of consistent sidewalks, especially downtown. It can kind of just dead end, or that there's inconsistent materials. And for the folks that have any sort of disabilities, there's just it's discomforting to try and get around and navigate spaces comfortably. It doesn't necessarily meet ADA compliance, which is the Americans with Disability Act. Let's see. We've heard that there's a lot of high speeds coming through downtown, with auto traffic coming through the roundabout, going very quickly in town. Big safety concern. Folks walking around don't necessarily feel very comfortable with that. Let's see, confusion on where to park. I had that actually coming in today, where I got here, and then Google told me to come into the backside of the community center. I was like, "Wait, how do I get there? Where do I park? What do I do?" So then I had to, actually look at the map and figure out where to go. But wayfinding, making sure that people know where they can park legally, appropriately, things of that nature, making sure that we're pointing people where we want them to go. Downtown parking is in high demand during peak seasons. So we have a consultant that's also working on transportation master plan concurrently that should be adopted roughly the same time period as the comprehensive plan. And they did a parking study. So, went out and inventoried the parking usage on different days. So they went on a kind of a low volume day on a Tuesday, I think it was, and found that for the most part, it was only about 20% occupied. So national standards say that about 80% occupancy is what most places are looking for. So that kind of tells you that for the most part, a lot of your public parking around town on, just non-peak days, weekdays is, there's a lot available for you. But on any given weekend day, especially this time of year when the leaves look really nice, or when you've got an event, it's over 100% capacity is what they found. So, then people start parking illegally, parking in front of people's homes, things of that nature. So, nothing great happening there. And then they also looked at opportunities for what expanding transit options could look like. So, looking at better connections to Eldora, inter-Nederland transit, so connecting within the community a little bit better. I know you're already served in some capacities by RTD with the bus to Boulder, the northbound Boulder. Indeed, so that is. So the transportation objectives. So prioritizing transportation equity and safety, I think a big one, and it can kind of be weaved throughout all of the other objectives as well. But ensuring that sidewalks and trails, pedestrian crossings are safe and comfortable, and that people feel like they can cross in a comfortable manner. And also working in close partnership with the Boulder County Safety Study and making sure that we're recognizing the recommendations that come out of that plan that's also happening at the county level. Ensuring that walking is comfortable and accessible, making sure that people feel like the sidewalks are usable for them, they're comfortable for them, and for anybody of all ages and abilities, they feel like they can actually use the pedestrian infrastructure in a comfortable way, and that they know where they're going. So looking at wayfinding opportunities, we've talked about trails and making sure that the community feels well connected in that capacity, but making sure that we're setting people up for success and letting them know where they can go. And then expanding transit options. So looking at bus stop upgrades in town and making them more comfortable and more seasonally resilient. And then also looking at intra-Nederland circulation. And that one, unfortunately, I can't talk too much about that because I don't know where they're going with this. And then the transportation objectives continued is the maintaining the transportation infrastructure. So updated maintenance plan, trying to go through and prioritizing all the different maintenance needs. It's a big task and it's a ongoing one. And implementing parking management strategies. So this is parking demand management. So things like maybe paid parking or maybe paid parking on peak days to try and encourage better parking. Parking wayfinding, making sure that we're setting people up for success, right? And not parking some places we don't want them to end up going. Parking enforcement and making sure that we're, actually going out and ticketing people that are parking illegally. And then over the long run, expanding parking supply.
Cool, yeah. All right. In through these, the next one is utilities and water resources. This one's really cool because recently the Department of Local Affairs has come out with a lot of tools to start to get to this way better than we were able to 10 years ago. So I'm pretty excited about this chapter. So right now, the town water system top issue is that it's not resilient to wildfire. So a wildfire in the Indian Peaks Wilderness, in that Boulder Creek watershed, all those things could be pretty catastrophic for the water system, simply because there's just not that much holding capacity for that emergency water. And so this is something that we're noticing right now, and that would be a very high priority in this chapter. Another thing that's come up is that there are unsecured water rights held by Nederland that requires Nederland to build at some point a reservoir and continue to work with the city of Boulder. So these are just things that we want to continue to be aware of in terms of securing those water rights at some point. However, the good news here is that water supply and demand is balanced regardless of those unsecured water rights. So currently there's more than enough water to meet the demand in Nederland, and that is projected to remain balanced at for the next 25 years at the current growth rate that Nederland is seeing now. So that is a pretty comfortable position to be in. Another key issue, though, is that new development could trigger a need to expand the water and wastewater facilities. This could happen rather slowly, just kind of normal development as usual, or it could happen very quickly if there was a very large development or things start to pick up very quickly. So at a certain point, I think it's around 75%, you have to start planning for that next infrastructure upgrade, and 90% you have to be shovel ready on it. So that is a consideration that's talked about in this plan. And then finally, electrical vehicles are coming to Nederland. Nederland specifically has a goal of getting fleets towards that. But whether or not those fleets happen, regardless, electric vehicles are coming to Nederland. And so starting to think about infrastructure in that sense is really important as well. So the objectives under this chapter are: one, strengthening the resilience of the water system in response to those wildfire concerns we just laid out. So this would be looking into a water system resilience plan, looking at how to develop that reservoir to secure additional water rights, and monitoring water rights in general, just to make sure that as those cases come up, Nederland is ready to handle those. Objective 2 is providing high quality public utility services to all Nederland residents. So this would require, utility provider coordination, making sure that when a utility project is happening, there's a dig once policy. So like, can we do a couple projects at the same time to minimize disruption? Exploring regional utility expansions to people who may not be on the sewer system already, maintaining impact fees for new development, making sure basically when a new development happens, they're paying a fee that helps pay for the utilities they're going to have. So it's not degrading current residents' actual service level there. Objective 3, we're looking at progressing towards a comprehensive recycling and composting program. So this would include things like waste reduction education, which Nederland's already doing but can continue to do, partnering with Boulder County for composting, and really emphasizing a recycling program. And then objective 4 would be promoting the transition to renewable energy sources and electric fleets. So again, this is going to be looking at a strategy for that electric fleet transition over a longer kind of term, looking at incentives for community renewables and integrating at some point renewables with our utilities. And so these are a little bit longer term. I see a question, can it wait towards, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So an impact fee is essentially when there is a new development, they pay a certain fee that helps go back into the utilities. So essentially it's a pay as you go kind of value or pay your own way, sometimes it's referred to. So it's basically to make sure that new development is not degrading the current quality of utility services for people who live in the town. Right, yep, that's the intention of that fee.
In excess of the initial tap fees that already exist.
Correct. So,
We call it a pit fee.
So it'd just be much larger.
yeah, and this is just one time, first time sort of fee, yep. Great. Got some culture.
It's funny, I don't think we planned this, but we're really
I
good.
know.
So we kind of lumped these together. We felt that with the town of Nederland being a very vibrant community, and so much of your, a lot of your economy is also very dependent on visitation, tourist traffic, that we felt like lumping these together kind of made some sense. So some key issues, housing availability, being able to make sure that people can retain a workforce, that they can, stay here and feel like they can live in the community and continue staying employed in their working environment is big. We're hearing that people can't really retain employees because they can't afford to live here. Gaps in business offerings, something we heard pretty loud and clear during the engagement, was that for a lot of folks, they feel like there's things that are missing, like pharmacies or childcare offerings, some medical clinics, printing, just things that you might find in certain communities that you would kind of expect to be able to run into, but they're kind of having to go outside of the community. So maybe you go to Boulder for dinner and a movie or something, and then you're like, well, I guess while I'm here, I should also probably grab some of the other provisions that I need. And so also making sure that there's infrastructure needs that serve the town. So downtown, there's, like we talked about earlier in the transportation section, there's gaps in sidewalks. It's a little unclear where you're supposed to go. Parking can be a bit of an issue. Making sure that the public infrastructure that serves these businesses is, well done, and is making sure that the folks feel like the community is in support of the economic development of downtown. Events, we heard a lot about events, that there's kind of, the two sides of the coin is on one hand, they bring a lot of visitation, and they can be very successful, but we've also heard that, they can have some pretty serious adverse impacts on the community, right? So it dumps a lot of people into a very small space, and, for a short amount of time, and it can be, pretty challenging to handle, but it's also a big demand on your infrastructure as well. A lot more people driving around, a lot more people parking, using your services. In all forms of art, we're highly valued. We understand that this is a very artistic community, very creative community, and making sure that we're, emphasizing that throughout the plan. So objective one was looking at ways, this isn't going to be an easy thing to do, but diversifying local business offerings in town. So the downtown plan touches on this quite a bit. And then there was also a few years ago, a tourism management strategy. So a group of consultants came in and helped look at some tourism offerings for the community and how they could leverage different opportunities. There's a really great plan in place. And so not wanting to duplicate the efforts there, but making sure that we're keeping that in front and center. And then exploring creative funding strategies for how we could maybe offset some of the, the costs of doing business in town, to be able to help make sure that folks can think about starting new businesses here that they wouldn't have considered otherwise. And then creative strategies for supporting local businesses. So continuing to leverage some of the things that we've already taken advantage of as a community. Import replacement tactics. So this is kind of a wonky thing that I got from Jane Jacobs, which is basically that the theory of this is that for the most part, import replacement is when people feel like they need to go outside of their community to get services that they can't get in their community. You can charge to try and find new creative ways to bring those services into your community. So Caleb pointed out in the land use section that things like in-home childcare aren't really compatible with your current, regulatory documents. So maybe we look at how we could legalize in-home childcare, or how we could allow certain businesses to be able to operate from their homes that could easily do so, right? Like if you're a bike mechanic, maybe you could do that from your garage just fine without having to buy a business space. So it's finding ways of leveraging the space you already have to allow people to use creative strategies to come up with new ways of doing things. And then the state of Colorado has a Main Streets program, which provides technical assistance and grants to communities that want to go through this program so they can look at new ways of leveraging new economic development resources. And then prioritizing investments in the public realm. So making sure that we're prioritizing maintenance on sidewalks and wayfinding signage in core areas where we're going to be generating a lot of revenue for tax businesses and purposes like that. And then leveraging partnerships between businesses, cultural and recreational events. So there's been talk about exploring a creative arts and culture district, and then implementing, again, tourism management strategies. And then there's also been discussions with the town about maintaining the visitor center. So looking at ways that we could have the visitor center be more of a hub for folks. And then exploring new opportunities for more localized events. So things that are maybe smaller scale and leveraging partnerships with existing organizations or schools. And I think this one's me. So health and human services. So this kind of chapter is looking at what kind of services are happening around your community already. And this is an area where we actually thought that Nederland was pretty well served by a lot of really great nonprofit organizations, a lot of great service providers. Some gaps that we did identify is that there are some service gaps like elder care and home child care and substance abuse programs. Transportation continues to be a key issue, but there are some opportunities for some accessible ride services. And more centralized communication was something that we heard in our stakeholder working groups about making sure that residents feel like they can access these service providers and nonprofit organizations a little bit better, because I think that there's a bit of a gap between, the service providers are out there, but does everybody know who's out there doing what? And then looking at maybe a grant writer position. So grants are a very difficult thing to go after. And so right now the onus of writing grants is falling on, a big chunk of town staff. And so finding somebody that could, kind of have a dedicated role in going after grants. And so, like we said, that we found like this is an area where the community is pretty well served by a lot of existing programs. So we didn't want to, in the efforts of trying to focus our attention on the chapters that we felt like needed more attention, we didn't really have a whole lot of strategies to look at here, but for the most part, trying to find new ways of connecting residents with local providers. So creation of a Nederland social services hub to be able to, get people better connected to their social services programs that are already in existence. And then looking at, amendments we could make to the land use code to allow for some flexibility for in-home service providers. And then this is looking at making sure that our community design features are supporting people of all ages and abilities. So one resource that we found was from the Denver Regional Council of Governments. The Boomer Bond Assessment is a community assessment tool looking at how the community is set up and how it serves older adults and their diverse needs. And so this is a free technical assistance program that the community could use. Okay, we got through it. Any questions? I know that there was a question earlier about housing, so I haven't forgotten. Okay, good. I'm going to turn that one over to John.
It depends on.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it depends on the zoning that you're in, like, residents was like 8,000, Mount residents like 1 acre.
Okay,
So it really depends on what zone you're in.
okay.
So we're finding now that a lot of lots were split pretty funky, and so you have to go through a minimum lot size variance for zoning adjustment to be able to do that.
Okay,
Mhm.
cause like half acre is not. Small.
Yeah,
No.
exactly.
Like if, and also I feel like that picture was kind of deceptive, because like, yeah, there's forest behind you, but if there's like another house right next to you and you're all half an acre, like that's not that big. Up here in mind.
Yeah.
So I was just curious, like what I didn't know.
Yeah, I'd be happy to send it to you.
Okay.
It's literally just so you know.
Curious.
Yeah, they try to base it based off of how like lots were split in each of the zoning.
Also, it makes sense that it's different for it's different. And then I was also curious about the density bonus. So like, I feel like it's very easy up here, because like everyone knows everybody kind of, at least, some people. And I feel like sometimes it's like, oh, well, if they got this, they know so-and-so, when it might not really be understood that they're is a standard. So I was just curious if there's like some sort of like standardization, like, oh, well, they built X amount of sidewalk, and so we gave them X, Y, Z, like something like standardized and not just like, oh, well, no, that sounds good, like it's a deal.
Yeah, do you want me to hold it? I did, if you want, so we really, the density bonus, they'd be looking more of the affordable aspect. We don't really have the funds to do that right now, so how we kind of accomplished that in our housing study was offering, if you're going to have deed restrict, and have some affordable units, you could get a variance
Okay.
for everything except for like your height. We don't play around with
Yeah,
height here, but like up to 50%. So you have a setback, for instance, your side yard might be 25. Split that in half if you're going to deed restrict it and sign that with the town. So it's really only for those like that affordable piece.
Okay, that makes sense, because it sounded like, oh, well, you can kind of do whatever you want, if you like, build a new wing on the community center or something.
Yes, yeah, no.
Like a standard.
And there's a whole, yeah, that would be
Yeah,
like a whole process with the
Okay.
board of trustees, so that it's very like, organized, professional. And the thing is too, is we, take away the fees if you're going to be doing that.
Yeah.
And we try to expedite that process for you, since
Yeah.
you're, supplying that affordable piece that we need.
Okay,
And I
I
was-
didn't realize it was connected to the affordable housing.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, and I don't think I made that clear, and I should say that that's also pretty standard. Most communities that do density bonus programs, that they're usually trying to get some sort of affordability.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's,
We just don't have the greatest resources to offer that yet, so we try to be creative in our approach, and hopefully we can continue.
Yeah, well, that makes sense.
Kind of follow up to this discussion and that question. One of the frustrations I've had living here for a long time is the affordable housing thing comes up over and over again. And it's been an issue for, well, I can tell you over 20 years, because I've lived here over 20 years, and so it's been ongoing. But what happens is we commit to a place that will have affordable units. But then what I've seen is we haven't had a mechanism to ensure that there's a prioritization toward people who either currently live in Nederland, maybe they're seniors that want to downsize, or people who may not live in Nederland, but who work in our town. And so the affordable units sometimes end up going to people who neither live here nor work here. And is there a way that we're going to be able to tackle that issue this time around?
Yes, and so one of the things we're trying to do is create what's called a multi-jurisdictional housing authority. And it would be on the peak to peak, so we partner potentially with Gilpin and Lyons. And that would create a board up here, and then when we locally control the funding sources that are going into projects, we can also locally control some of the things that you just mentioned. And there's some really good examples, especially in Summit County and Grand County, of programs that they've done that work really well for that. And so our first step is getting that MGHA running and get that board working. And then the second step would be to look at our funding sources that we can generate. And if we are going to put an investment into a housing project, what we would require and the kind of return on investment, which would be a social return of this is for our workforce or our teachers. There's a lot of different examples of ways to do that. And I think we're very close to having that organization ready to stand up.
The Boulder County Housing Authority, like they've been held to HUD rules, federal HUD rules, so they have to. And federal law, so they're kind of using them as not.
Yeah, that's been the pattern, and that's been frustrating.
Which is, ties to one of your objectives to continue partnerships with CHA. That's a problem for just that reason. It brings, they're tied to those federal. It's.
Yeah.
Legal.
And so we end up solving the affordable housing issue for other communities, and not for ourselves, is the problem I'm seeing.
it's true. Yeah,
They'll always be partners, but I think with this multi-jurisdictional.
I think it also allows you to help define affordability for your community in a way that works well.
I have a question, at the beginning of the presentation, you said something about, it was in the housing section of something about convenient access to urban services. What was meant by that? Why people wanted something that was in one of the objectives. I'm like, what? What does that mean? Like, what urban services are being referred to there? I'm very curious.
Sorry, I'm just trying to make sure I orient as
In the
well.
very section, I believe.
I just wonder if it was in the regional
In the,
discussion.
maybe it was in the regional,
It might have been,
In here?
yeah, it might have been here.
yeah, in context, so I just didn't understand what was meant by that at all.
Well, I think it's kind of, do you want to, you,
Sure, yeah, I would say this isn't an objective of the plan. This is speaking to just how Netherlands sits in the region. It's basically just an acknowledgement that Boulder and Denver are close enough that residents of Netherlands can go there pretty conveniently. So it's really more just kind of like setting the stage contextually.
Like
Yeah.
access to an urban environment, not.
International airport.
And the fact that
Gotcha.
yeah, exactly.
yeah, this is more like defining the existing context. Yeah,
Okay.
right. No, I'm glad I'm glad you asked.
I have a question on the electrification. Is that speaking to the electrification of our town vehicles or more toward our utility substation, kind of like, can our utility network handle the load that we're expecting?
Yeah, we, heard, like, we have an objective written for both, or at least we have an action written for both. So we have an action that talks about starting to plan for a transition of the town fleet to electrical. But we also have this discussion of integration, renewable integration with utilities, but that would require more coordination with like utility providers. Those aren't all town owned. But yeah, I mean, both are objectives in the plan and both are probably on the longer term side of implementation.
And then to follow up on the electrification of town vehicles, are we looking at the resiliency of shifting our fleet to electric vehicles? Yes, but also keeping a fleet of diesel or gas powered vehicles for storm days or days where we're basically gonna have power shut down. And now you're asking, where is that power coming from for those vehicles on cold days?
Yeah, actually, I don't know if we've totally considered that.
Like, what if it's basically, you ran our batteries down?
I think one of the big electrical issues for us that we need to talk about as a community is we're likely to see power outages more frequently from Excel just in extreme weather events. And we need to build community resiliency around that. There is what's called a microgrid here, which is the battery system and a generator backup, because this is one of our, this is our evacuation center and we use it for warming in the wintertime. And there's probably opportunities around town to increase that infrastructure in key areas so that, for instance, like the grocery store doesn't lose all their frozen food every time the power goes out.
Yeah.
And things like that. And there could be big community benefits by building a dispersed microgrid here. So that's something that we have been exploring. And I think that really ties in hand with this too.
Yeah, definitely.
I want to go to the land use section, and I was wondering if you can say a little bit more about the new growth and infill and the different, categories of land where you talked about the downtown core and mixed use was clear, but then there was something about the perimeter, and I noted NR and MR, not residential, and then I'm not sure what NR stands for. So.
Yeah, okay. So let's start with these just since we're on the future land use map. So NR stands for neighborhood residential. It is not a zoning district, so this is not legal. This is a land use category. So it's more for planning purposes for saying what is the ideal mix here. So neighborhood residential is this yellow, and it's basically speaking towards, a mixture kind of residential neighborhood where there's single family homes for sure. There's also some more multi-family homes mixed in there, as well as residential supportive land uses like churches and schools. And then MR, that stands for mountain residential. This is talking about those more difficult parcels that are on steeper slopes, larger lot sizes, where really a single family home is a more applicable land use there. So that's that distinction. And then can you remind me of the first part of that question?
So you're talking about infill. So does this conform to the way that neighborhoods have been zoned as like mountain residential, but what is it? Is NR changing that, or is that new areas that would be designated as NR?
So this wouldn't change zoning because it's just a land use. So essentially it's a planning tool for us to say this is what's ideal. What I will say is that recently a couple of zones have changed, like I think the MDR and the HDR changed December to allow a little bit more housing. So that's actually kind of going to reflect this future land use map a little bit better. So those changes have already started to occur. Speaking towards the idea of infill, essentially what this is saying is that the comprehensive plan is putting a slight more emphasis on if growth is going to happen. It's better in those 33% or whatever it was vacant parcels as opposed to looking towards, expanding horizontally out. Yeah, Don.
I just had, feedback from you. At 33% or whatever that is,
Mhm.
were those identified as, did you look into what kind of land that was? Was it any of it on the floodplain? Was any of it on a unbuildable,
Yeah.
range of the slope? And I'm wondering where quality of life is figured into this, because we moved to the mountains to get out of the city, not to move into a jungle apartment complex and multi. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Okay.
And that's not to say, so please don't anybody take that as anything negative toward Kingston Village, please.
Right.
But I mean, to start to stack everything up so tightly that we cut down all the trees,
Mhm.
where it was originally the open space, which was originally designated to preserve the green
Mhm.
space.
Absolutely.
To preserve the mountain feel of the town and not just have a solid block of houses when you see, come over the reservoir and all you see is built out space.
Mhm.
To have a little bit of, to have a pine tree here or there.
Yeah. Talking about kind of both parts. First, the idea of the vacant parcel. So that 37% is just kind of everything thrown in there. So we do know that there are some that really just are vacant because, they're super steep or like they are in a floodplain. So that could be slightly lower percentage. However, there are also vacant parcels that we've identified that are flat, that totally have chance for redevelopment. So, that trend is still true, even if, that exact percentage of how many are buildable could be lower. Speaking towards, infill, I think it can be kind of scary talking about density and infill, starting to visualize, like these 3 to 4 story buildings. But what we're really talking about here is still like there would be zoning, there would be architectural standards that will be talked about in the downtown plan. So that would ensure that the development that happens is like at an appropriate scale, appropriate character, just in a parcel that hasn't been built yet before, starting to expand outward. And I also think there's always the trade-off of like, there's building in town to preserve nature outside of town, and then vice versa. You don't want to also make it an urban jungle in town either. So I think this plan does a good job speaking to both, because we also have an objective that talks about historic preservation and talks about architectural preservation. So we are aware of kind of that push and pull between the two, and make sure that both are spoken to in the comments.
Between increasing that density when we still don't have egress, I know egress out of town, basically one way out, and any prioritization given to that needs to be addressed before we add a whole bunch of handle, a whole bunch more housing.
Yeah, I mean,
That's all.
Yep. I think so. Again, on that point in the objective 1, where we're talking about directing growth to the appropriate locations, there will be some language in there about, okay, well, what are these appropriate locations? So places that have less egress wouldn't be included in that, but saying like, okay, these more central locations in town would be. So the comprehensive plan will kind of have some language to address those things. And then, of course, some of the actions will be follow up to evaluate certain places, like how much density could go here, but it's kind of like comprehensive plan does stay at a little bit of a higher level than getting into all of those details about egress.
Add to that, the sort of final chapter that we don't quite have ready yet is the implementation matrix, where we speak to things like the priorities and the sequencing of all of these. So definitely looking at the egress, we'll hear in the Subarea plan, or we'll see, reference to the potential second bridge. So that is something we've known about for a while. But Donna, your comment is well taken. We'll make sure it's factored in.
Yep.
So kind of a follow-up there to that issue. One of the concerns I've had are some of the types of affordable housing that have been popular, if you will, and even discussed, but I really feel are a disservice, if you will, to people who might live in this community, things like tiny home village. The worry I have is that, knowing people who lost everything in the Marshall Fire and had full homes with space in between and all of that, and had less than 5 minutes to get out with their lives. I worry that something like that, regardless of meeting fire code, if a wildfire comes through, I think those people would never get out. So I'd like to see some of the other options that are out there in mountain communities that seem more appropriate to this area. Consider there's modular housing complexes, inexpensive to build, nice design, affordable, all of that. I also saw one recently, a couple months ago in the news. It's a Colorado company, and they're not tiny homes, but they're modest bungalows. Very affordable. They're using 3D printing to do foundations and other. I'd like to see us look at some of those kinds of things as better quality and more resilient to wildfire, and because I don't think we should put people who are simply of more modest income in the way we have it. I think we need to look at that.
Yeah, I think something that we talked about with regards to resilience is looking at like making sure that the building codes are reflective of what you're talking about, and knowing that this is a wildfire prone area, right? And so just making sure that we're cognizant of that in our building regulations.
President, all our building code, they updated 2018, but Rick Henderson pushed real hard in the fire, the cladding, the sprinkler systems, and it's new construction.
Yeah, it's pretty
much
hard.
really safer.
And you have to have a mitigation plan as well, or if it's a new build, there, yeah, some of those other homes, but yeah, there is. But it's expensive, right?
Right.
It's very expensive. So yeah, you have very valid.
And that's the trade-off. You know, we talked about this is the highest need of our community. So the town isn't paying for any of this housing. It has to be attractive for a developer to come in and be willing to build this stuff. So if we say, okay, we're gonna make the cost of this new housing 3 times as much, the likelihood of us getting that housing goes down dramatically. So there's a trade-off. You know, there was a time in this community where no one would have considered apartment complexes, or, you know, and there was a lot of pushback against fourplexes. But now, you know, things change, our environment changes, and the amount of people that need housing, that's somewhere where you have to look at some trade-offs. So higher density, you know, I understand what you're saying about the tiny home villages, but, you know, if you really look at that code we looked at, you know, no one is putting 15 tiny home villages on a 1 acre lot. There's density stuff that we put in there. So I think some of the fears that you have are actually addressed by how we wrote that code.
I agree, but what I'm saying is I think there are some that really do meet the need and are affordable and very expeditious to build that are out there that frankly look a little bit better in terms of this kind of community than the tiny home. Very popular. It sounds more like this generation's version of trailer park, and I think some of these other options, which are affordable and they're being built in Colorado, and some of them in mountain communities, may be better options for that.
Yep. Definitely important to look at the best typology given the context, and that's always going to be kind of on a development by development basis, I think, to some extent. But yeah, thank you for that.
So just make sure we have time for the sub-area plan and questions for that. We will switch gears here. But depending on how quickly we get through, we will still have some time for questions at the end.
Okay, Don, you want to fill the lights?
I got it.
Thanks. All right, let's talk about your beloved downtown. This was, so sub-area plans, comprehensive plans, look at the entire city boundary, and what is common in communities is to do sub-area plans that kind of go into a little bit more detail, where the comprehensive plan is what it says, it's comprehensive. A sub-area plan can get into more detail. And so town board and staff, when they issued the comprehensive plan, they thought it was important to go ahead and include a downtown Subarea plan, given development pressure in downtown, utilities, infrastructure. Just, I mean, this is the core of Nederland, and they wanted to have a blueprint to kind of tell the town and also the DDA next steps and how to move forward. So this will be a guiding document for downtown. As I said, it's a little more detail, and what we're currently working on, we've been working with the DDA and downtown property and stakeholders, but we've gone into, in the last month, a more intensive session trying to get the DDA and the town board to come together, since they are, the DDA will likely invest in a lot of these issues. They need to, have a seat at the table. They also have a plan of development that is required by law that they follow, and that's what we used kind of to set up the downtown plan. So a lot of these are kind of carried forward ideas from that, but updated. And so the DDA can use this plan and the town can use this plan. We, just as the comprehensive plan has a vision statement for each chapter, we took from we did an online survey as well for the downtown study area, as well as workshops back in March. And this is kind of a picture, a vision for downtown based on feedback we got. So I'll just, downtown Nederland, and this is a future vision. Downtown Nederland is a place for locals and visitors to gather, shop, dine, and play together. Visitors remember Nederland as a distinctive place that has a unique sense of community and laid-back small-town mountain vibe. The architecture is a mix of old and new buildings that reflect the historic character and create an authentic place. Downtown is easy to access and inviting for people of all ages and abilities. Locally owned businesses thrive and make downtown Nederland a unique destination while also serving the daily needs of residents. People feel at one with nature, enjoying trails along the creek and lake and taking in majestic mountain views. Its historic roots as a mining town, ski town, and music town are reflected through its architecture, public spaces, arts, and festivals. So within the downtown Subarea plan, like the comprehensive plan, kind of has their chapters. These are shorter, it's a shorter plan. But we identified pressing topics through our engagement, the online survey, and those for downtown specific are economic development and housing, growth and character, so architecture, circulation, gateways and parking, and then recreation, tourism, and placemaking. These are just some word clouds that came out of the survey. So we asked what do people love most about downtown, and the top one is, you can see a lot of things, small town, locally owned, character, covered bridge. And what would people change about downtown? You can see sidewalks really big. So within the downtown Subarea plan, we also identify catalytic projects. These are really transformative projects that could influence the future of downtown for many, many years. And so they can also influence other smaller projects to happen. So these include creating a First Street overlay district, which modifies design standards for any development along First Street so that they are ensured to be in line with the character that exists, the existing one-story building kind of character. First Street as a festival street. This was a big thing we talked about. People got really excited. Some people, said shut down First Street, make it all pedestrian. Some people didn't like that idea and still wanted parking. So this is a concept to explore, which many communities are doing from COVID. Idaho Springs, where John came from, and I helped them with their plan, as well as exploring a flexible street so that, like, in the winter months when there aren't as many visitors, it functions as a regular street. You have parking, you access to businesses, but maybe in the summers or weekends or First Fridays, whatever you decide, it could easily be shut down and made a festival street. Also working on your gateways. So there is really no sense of arrival. As a visitor coming to Nederland, you don't really know when you're here. And so looking at, these are the number 3s up here at your major intersections, creating, fixing the roundabout, making more landscaping, more signage, telling people where to go. This is where you go to parking, talking about the wayfinding issue combined with the gateways. Snyder Street Bridge is a big move. It is, necessary for that resilience infrastructure, but it also has very big impacts on downtown. Waterfront park and amphitheater is another big one. And then in the light pink around here are identified kind of areas for that have potential for private investment. So this is not, this whole plan is not saying that the town, the DDA can do everything. You really will be reliant on some private investment happening. So within the downtown boundary that we drew, there are a little bit different character areas happening. So this sets up kind of a vision for each of these areas. Kind of West Gateway, Tungsten Village area, Wolf Tongue, kind of industrial, South Gateway where the shopping center is, downtown core being the central business district core, downtown east, which is more of a residential character, North Gateway as you come in from Boulder, and then really this concept of stringing Boulder Creek and Barker Reservoir into one giant greenway and park. So recommendations here, again, these are kind of shortened versions. There's more detail in the plan, but under economic development and housing, this is really working, especially now to stabilize existing businesses. I think there are a few that we know of that are at risk or may, have plans to close. So stabilizing them, helping keep them in place, also recruiting new businesses. So we heard a lot in our online surveys that there aren't a lot of the services. You may be going to Boulder or other places for those services. So what can we bring in? And then incentivizing affordable and workforce housing, new development in downtown as appropriate. Growth and character, a big thing that we may be actually working on right away. And we have detailed recommendations in the plan, so it won't take much, but we worked with the community to talk about that First Street overlay and what that might include in terms of how to modify the existing standards that are allowed in zoning and how we might modify or tweak those for First Street so that new development is more in line with that 1-2-story character. Updating industrial zoning to allow for a mix of uses. So right now it doesn't allow for anything but industrial, even though there are residents. So letting that, we're calling it flex right now. I kind of see that as an opportunity to be a lot of different things. You could have a microbrewery over there and residents. So looking at just that mix of uses. Let's see, encouraging adaptive reuse of buildings and activating vacant buildings and sites first before you go build new buildings. Let's activate what we have and fix them up if you can. And maybe there are grants and programs to help property owners do that. And then encouraging protection of historic assets. So there has been some historic surveys done in the town in the past. For example, the mill site is potentially eligible. There is a First Street district, kind of the residential district on East First Street, has potential. So just continuing to support historic preservation. Circulation, gateways, and parking. This is a lot. This is like, here's your marching orders for investment for the TIP program and grants. Number 1 was listed. These are kind of in order: Jefferson Street and West First Street. This is something that the town has already had engineered drawings done for. We made a few tweak recommendations to match kind of the circulation goals, but getting that in place, Jonathan can talk more about grants. Upgrading sidewalks to be ADA. This was a huge thing, as you saw in the word cloud. People are concerned about it. It's one of the worst downtowns. I've been to a lot of downtowns. This is what I do. And I can barely, walk around safely in your downtown. So implementing roundabout gateway. So the roundabout, the at Second and Bridge, making improvements to that. We have recommendations and a rendering in the plan for that. Creating a parking management plan. Redesigning Lakeview Drive and Highway 72 intersection. So that's a confusing intersection. It's offset, and we worked with our transportation planners and have a preliminary design for that. Designing Snyder Bridge. So moving forward with the design of the bridge in that placement, the preferred placement along Snyder alignment. implementing more sidewalks and on-street parking, when streets, so as you go with the TIP program, if you're making improvements to a street, making sure to, include on-street parking, making sure that it's lined appropriately, it's signed, and people know that they can park there and what the rules are. And then finally, under recreation, tourism, and placemaking, the DDA already has a wayfinding signage plan, so we're just saying implement that, but get it in place. I think it's ready to go. Creating a downtown maintenance district was something for trash recycling. So this is a separate district that could be in charge of just commingling and having, instead of the businesses each being responsible for that on their own, they could have a managed district for that. Redesigning First Street as the Festival Street, which I already talked about. So that next step would be designing that. We're talking about testing that out even as soon as next summer with a little bit of programming and investment. You can really try to test that out and see what people think and get feedback. Designing and implementing the waterfront park and amphitheater, adding pedestrian scaled lights. You have no lights. It's very dark here, and I know we want to protect our night skies, but also it's important to have that for safety reasons as well. And then adding a series of small plazas and picnic areas was also talked about in the comprehensive plan. We have some ideas and designs in the downtown plan that go a little bit further in terms of locations and ideas. So then also in the plan, we created a master, this 3D model, so you can actually fly around it. But for tonight's presentation, it's a still view of bringing all those recommendations to, geographically. So this is like looking at the downtown core and highlighting things like what the future First Street could look like as a festival street, improved intersections, taking people from the visitor center down to Snyder Street. It also shows a future Snyder Street bridge. It has a concept of connecting on the south side, on the river side, the north, creating a downtown loop and really trying to make that more pedestrian friendly. I just walked it before I came here today, and I can get around it, but it'd be cool if it was formalized. And so like pocket parks and ideas, the roundabout is also redesigned. So all of that is brought together graphically in all of these illustrations. And we do have a disclaimer. Those for conceptual purposes only. It's not, representing actual development proposals, but they're ideas. And so this is North Gateway in downtown. So as you come in, there's that big, one of your vacant parcels is very developable and could be prime real estate for a lot of different things, but certainly housing is where the number 7 is, and that pink blob on the map by the post office. And also concepts to, like I said, string together that creek and waterfront as one big amenity for the community. South Gateway, some of the things are more fixing the intersection around by Ace Hardware. Let's see, that's Lakeview, redesigning Lakeview. It actually has enough right of way that you could add parking there, and it's a quick walk to downtown, especially when the bridges has gone in. So anyway, these are illustrations to kind of bring all of those concepts together, and there's more views and more renderings in the plan, but we wanted to keep it pretty simple for tonight. And yeah, I can take any questions on downtown issues now. Yes.
This is really just a clarification. Earlier this year, I think it was on Zoom because there was a big storm, but there was a presentation about the downtown area, and I noticed a conflict between the parking in the previous presentation and what was said here, which is that initially, I think it was your group that said that you did a parking study, and even on busy days, there was more than enough parking. It was that people didn't know where to park that was appropriate or not. And then I think in the previous presentation, this one, it was that there was a study done on, busy days, weekends and so on. There's not enough parking.
Mhm.
So has something changed or is it just a difference in the studies or?
Yeah, so back then in March, we advised our transportation firm to come back on a peak day at more of a summertime weekend. And what they found was, in those peak days, it is above capacity. But the other times that they had done before March, there really wasn't showing a parking problem, but also that's winter. So,
Oh, well, that does make a difference.
Yeah.
That clear.
but they did come back in a peak day. Forget the
Could you
dates.
get the biggest line just so I can see that well?
Mhm.
The Snyder Street Bridge, I think that's an urgent project. And I read somewhere where it was only going to be used for emergencies. And I think if it would be open all the time, it would really relieve traffic on 119,
Mhm.
the Big Spring spokes.
Yeah, so we don't specifically, we did ask that and it was kind of split on, we asked people, should it be only for emergencies or all the time? And the decision was pretty split. When you go to design the bridge, I'm sure there will be more engagement around that. I tend to agree with you. I think that it can be designed as a nice looking bridge that's quaint and fits the downtown character, but allows vehicles as well. As pets, yeah. John?
And we don't control that property right now. And so that's part of the equation is we have to
Yep.
make sure we can have a feasible project.
And if there's a financial problem, they can always make it a toll bridge.
Only $5 million. That's the estimate for that bridge.
On the, I'm kind of piggybacking that Snyder Street, have we looked at the transportation design? If we were to make it a fully public open bridge for traffic to flow, how would we change the transportation design?
We looked at, they're looking at the circulation.
Okay.
No matter what, we are advising that the bridge be designed to accommodate vehicles. Obviously, that's what, you want to get out of town. So it'll be designed that way, regardless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Clarifying though, if that second bridge goes in and it's not open all the time to vehicle traffic, would it be open all the time to pedestrian traffic? And
Yes.
the people use
Yes.
it?
So I'm curious about this like festival street
Mm-hmm.
stuff. Also, how do business owners on First Street like become involved so I can like give you all feedback?
Mm-hmm.
Because festival days for me are terrible.
Mm.
And twice during the summer, I've driven to work and been told, oh, the street's closed. And I'm like, how do I get to my store? And then I asked like the crossing guard people, are y'all letting people know that like businesses are open? And the response both times was, your business is open? So it's really hard. And
Mhm.
I'm only in my second year.
Mm-hmm.
And I really need like every weekend. So if there's a way that we could, when we just close off the street, it
Mhm.
doesn't automatically create a festival.
Mm-hmm.
Like I have many
Yeah.
pictures of like noon on a Saturday and there is no one because everyone thinks that like something like a utility is being worked on or
Yeah.
something like that. And, I feel like if businesses were brought into it, like, hey, let's make this a festival day where we all do a sidewalk sale or we all do something.
Mm-hmm.
Even just an email, like, hey, friends, you're not gonna be able to get to your store today. Like, very basic things like that, I think would be like helpful.
I think we are missing things, and I think it really boils down to management of how that happens, like inputted. Because in pretty much, in my experience, festival streets managed properly, make sales happen better, and that's what we build. And that's what we like to do is build the infrastructure, so it's easier to manage. But one of the things that the DDA has been talking about and the town would like to partner on it with is to create something called like a vitality task force or something like that, where it would be stakeholders, which is the business owners and community members, where we can come together and talk about different issues that are affecting people.
Yeah.
So that we can iterate quickly if something like that happens, so it's not also a problem for you, so you have easier contact points. And then we can get to the people who need to hear from you quickly. And so no matter what happens, that's gonna be happening very soon, and we're gonna be trying to build that stakeholder list so that we can work together on that, like,
But in the meantime, you can always reach out to me if it's not properly being like notified. I'm happy to try to work with Peter and myself to
Yeah.
really make sure that you guys are being notified and that we know people are doing work or what's going on there. So yeah, please feel free to always like give that feedback. I'm happy. You already have my info.
Yeah.
But
I feel like
Yeah.
the lowest hanging fruit is like, let me know,
yes,
like.
yep.
Cause then I can like do something, I can like sneak a sign somewhere, or, I don't know, the rock shop is really sweet, and they usually send people down my way. But it's just really hard being,
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, like minor, like immediate fixes could probably be like, hey, there's gonna be work on the street, but our businesses are open, so like Peter and I are happy to get your
Yeah.
feedback and make sure that that's like a priority until we can really mitigate this
We'll
problem.
make sure that happens right away.
Yes,
Ross said, he said he had the same issue on those festivals. Like only down Saturday festival. And then, that was it.
I literally have a picture of that Saturday at 12 noon, and there's not anybody on First Street. Like, I didn't get a customer until like 2 o'clock, and my busiest hour is 11 usually. It's just, it's like literally letting people know, like, hey, y'all, we're open.
Mhm.
Or even like shutting down, I feel like one time last year, the year before, we shut down half of the street.
Mhm.
Like, that's really helpful, like low hanging fruit like that. Yeah.
About Overstreet banners or signage, it's
Yeah.
large.
Yeah.
I mean, theoretically, I would love to do that. That was very expensive and very dull.
I can tell you the crossing guards that day weren't there, there was not as best coordination between the crossing guards and the event itself. And,
I feel like that's been fairly consistent though, like every time I'm like, hey, can y'all please let people know that businesses are open, and every time it's like you're open. I'm like, hey, this is not first rodeo, this is Saturday, like, we're all open. Like, we should know.
So I have another question, which may not fairly go to this group, but maybe more to town representatives. One of the concerns, I mean, is that over the years, the town, we've all invested in lots of different things, whether that's parks, recreation facilities, trails, parking lots, and we're talking about all of that in both of these discussions here. And one of the problems I've seen is we get the grant money or subsidized money or we get a tax implemented, whatever it is. But then there isn't a long-term plan for true long-term maintenance, the facility, the things we build.
Hmm.
So, yeah, we have a plan to pick up the trash and maybe clean the restroom or whatever. But then when something needs to be repaved, or it needs a new roof, or we need to replace the building, whatever it is, we don't have a long-term budget plan to accomplish that. And so we built some nice facilities that then deteriorate and become so expensive to fix, if you will, that then we don't have the money to do that. And so is there a long-term plan for, we move in these directions that what we build will actually be able to be maintained, not just the small day-to-day things, which is expensive enough, but 20 years from now, the parking lot needs to be redone. I mean, maybe sooner than that, given our weather. Right, you see what I'm raising?
Totally.
I take that.
Yeah.
That's my job. That's why I'm here. And so what
Okay.
I need to be honest, we don't have financial resources right now to do a lot. And what we need to do more than anything in this town is to really think about this resiliency framework that they've created, which has multiple parts. And one of those is the economic sustainability of this town. I think everybody wants Nederland to be Nederland, and I think we all know what that means, even if we can't say it out in words. But at the same time, we need to have economic spaces that are vibrant and able to support our towns and make sure toilets keep flushing. And that's honestly something that worries me almost every day is toilets keep flushing. And I'm here to make that happen. And so what I would like to do is take this plan that Cheney built. And one of the cool things for me coming here is I have worked fairly extensively with Cheney, and we have tested these ideas in other places that work. And we have all the tools we need and the framework. And so what we need to do is, like you said, we need to make sure we have long-term plans. And that's one of the reasons one of the very first things I did when I get here is ask the board to pause the paid parking plan. And that's because we needed to take a little bit more time and make sure we got it right. And as we kind of build this infrastructure, you know, there's going to be things that everybody has different feelings about. But if we can come to the consensus that we need to take care of what we have, you know, I think it's fairly clear in our CIP for our water and wastewater funds alone, we have maybe $17 million with projects that need to get done. And that's over a 10-year horizon. And that may change just depending on how things go. But we need to be very financially responsible with our resources and remember that, you know, like they said, we're impacted by tourism and we need to make sure we manage that flow and make it appropriate and make sure this is a place where people can live all the time and that we have those resources we need. And so that's what my plan is. And I'm hoping that as we all kind of come together and I join this team, that we can really work in concert on making sure that we can keep taking care of things. I'll give you like an example is, you know, like the permeable pavement on 2nd Street. One of the challenges with that was we don't have a street sweeper, which we needed. And so that's a really great project, but then we need to make sure that we continue to have the tools we need to take care of things. And I think that comes down to making sure we have trained staff that have the tools they need and that when we have a plan like this, we implement it in a reasonable way so that you know, we start building this sustainability into like our economy.
The taxes are already high and that also impacts affordability for people who want to move here or live here long term. I mean, that's as much affordable housing issue as all the rest of it.
Right.
I will say, just piggybacking on, I feel like, just from my perspective, being at the end of First Street, like, we could get more from taxes from tourists, genuinely. There are people who can't get to my store because they are in wheelchairs or they have a stroller or they're walking with a cane. I feel like a lot of businesses could do better, you know, just with low hanging fruit, like wayfinding, like, oh, I want to be here. Where do I park? Or I don't need a cycle toward them. I feel like there's low hanging fruit.
Thank you for sharing that. And when we get these meetings going, I'd really like to make sure you're there. Because what I'd like to do is start making boards of these issues and we really start thinking about it.
And I'm also happy to share like my perspective, like my sales on festival days compared to a normal Saturday or like whatever is helpful.
You probably have great ideas about what you think with business in general. And I think as a community, if we start coming together on those ideas, I think that's what we're going to get started. So
But
I like the idea that, you know, even if we have all the big posts, if you will, and then when there is a festival, put up the banner, if you will, across them and it guides people down First Street and into the shops.
Right.
Denison has one Denison in North Denver has one that's like, it's not a permanent banner. So I think some of the costs could be changed.
Yeah, but those are, so especially in Med, because it's windy, I know for a fact that those caissons for that go down 24 feet on Tennyson Street just to hold a banner. So, but there are other, you know, like in Idaho Springs, we did these, you wheel them out in the middle of the street and they say, you know, the marketplace. So there's ways to do that better than how you're doing that.
Okay, we do have a next step slide just to recalibrate everyone to the process. We talked a little bit about this at the beginning, but I will be working with Peter to make some sort of an online survey tool so that people can, if they want to review the plan in more detail. We gave about a week, a little bit more for people to review a lot of pages. And so no expectation that that's happened. But if you are curious about going to a specific chapter and reading it in more detail after this meeting, we will provide a forum for feedback on that. The next step will be working with John and Britt and staff to go through the plan, fine tune some of those recommendations, and then create the implementation matrix or implementation plan. It's just a table. And similar with the Subarea plan, that next step is the implementation table. So as I mentioned earlier, Planning Commission later this month, DDA board will be in November, board feedback November 19th, and still aiming for that December adoption date. That is not set in stone at this point. Would be great to get there, but we definitely want to be responsive to public feedback and staff feedback. So we do have some flexibility built in.
Can I just add, if, you guys are talking to people that, you know, you have an aging population here and our internet is amazing. So, people can always come by staff's office, come to town hall. If you need us to like open our laptop and run through a chapter, like this is stuff we did with like our housing study, you know, obviously this is a lot to print. But, you know, just know that like, if you are hearing that from the community as well, they're more than welcome to call us, to come by. I understand not everyone is online. And we're working on that as well. But just like to always put that out there, that I realize not everyone's online, so please share that to your friends and neighbors as well.
And that is one final question. Will these two presentations be posted?
Yes,
Yes,
So
Yep, we'll get it up on.
we could be here.
yeah, we're recording this right now. So this presentation will be on, but I will also upload the slides
The
to
PDF, yeah.
the comp plan update page. And the drafts for both plans are already up there. So you can already go look at them.
Could something be in, like, the Mountain Year to tell people that they are posted and where they can find them?
That's something we need to work on.
And hopefully linking to the YouTube, you know, of these meetings, because,
Yeah.
you know, that's a great opportunity for people to come back, you know, in their own time when they have it,
Mm-hmm.
to watch and listen, and then they can still provide feedback, even though they can be here.
Absolutely. And thank you all for attending this evening. I know that it was a beautiful afternoon out and we chose to listen about this, but it's very important. And I really appreciate everyone's feedback. Please take snacks on the way out for you, for your kiddos, for your partners. I don't want to take home a bunch of popcorn, although I do love it. Any other final thoughts? Does it feel like, are there red flags? Are there going in the right direction?
So I'm just curious, I
Mhm.
know that this is not based on resources. Right? You don't look at this. So there's gotta be a step somewhere, and I'm not sure where it is, where we look at this and then we marry it up with what is feasible for money and
The reality
resources.
check part of
You
it.
know, and what is, okay, here's, like you said, the low hanging fruit of things we can do in the next 24 months. Some of these are, you know, 5 years plus out.
Yep.
You know, and does that at all fall in your realm, or where would that actually happen?
Yeah, no, we absolutely, it would be not great of us to just say, here's 50 things, figure it out. So we will be doing some prioritization with staff, with our team, sort of in that implementation table step. Board feedback, PC feedback, that's all important here. I will say that some of the actions do recognize that limited capacity. And so looking at like a grants coordinator, I think when Miranda gave a report where she was managing like 25 grants or something like that, and that is mind boggling. So something like that could help unlock resources that right now you just don't even have the capacity to look at, apply for, and manage. So there are some things that could be freed up, but absolutely your point is well taken. There will be some prioritization and then looking at some of the short-term and long-term. But I would say with all the communities that we work with, that is, okay, how are we going to pay for this? Who's going to do it? Do we have staff for that? So making sure that it's in a plan document is a great first step. And then we have to think about how it's actually implemented. So will be.
So that'll be part of the final.
Great. Yep,
I
absolutely.
think it would be useful to most people in town to see prioritization and timeline and cost, you know, this will cost this amount. So it's a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan. And this is, you know, this amount, and we have a big grant, so we can do it in 24 months.
Yes.
That would make a big difference to people to really visualize and understand the amount of change and the timeline of change, which is also a major factor when redoing a comprehensive plan takes.
Yeah, absolutely. And so some of those like implementation tables can be kind of wonky and just like hard to look at and filter through. So I think it's on us to make sure that in the body of the document, we do a good job explaining the priority, and then also still leave room for opportunities that might come up out of nowhere. There's always new programs, new grant programs, new opportunities coming out, so.
Next big infrastructure bill.
Yeah, exactly. Who knows what could happen? So, making sure that we're not too rigid saying, this absolutely is the sequence, but still leaving room for taking advantage of those opportunities. But thank you for finishing with that. Awesome. Thank you all.
Should be Northern Lights.
Oh, nice.
Thank you. Supposed to be really spectacular.
Yay, awesome. Good to hear.
And so I don't think we the trans.
Yeah. Yeah, that's perfect.
There's probably some kind of things. We have to drill top buses, like 250 passengers. So I think we're.
Great job, Caleb.
I know Laura has. Privacy checks. I